what kicks us out, not just doing what we shouldn't do. It's specifically thinking the fruit is ours. That's why it's eating fruit. All right. One of the most famous stories in humanity is Genesis 1. Paradise Lost. You've got this ideal world, and humans just mess it up. This ideal state, this ideal harmony, this metaphorical, this symbolic, beautiful harmony. And from the Judaic-Christian and Islamic lens, you have the human desire to eat from the tree of knowledge. And that leads to getting kicked out of, got kicked out of the garden. Our ancestors, they did it. They got kicked out. We're still paying for it. But what is the Vedantic interpretation of this? What is the Vedantic symbolic takeaways from the story of the fall of man? It is probably 10 times richer of a story. Now that I've studied this philosophy for a little over a decade, and it's 10 times richer of a story than the version that I had in my head growing up. Not saying that I was in any way a scholar that had a rich version growing up of the story. It was mainly just ate an apple that gave them knowledge, and they disobeyed God, and boom, they got the boot. That was kind of the extent of my perspective on the story of the fall of man. But in the last decade, this story has taken on so many new layers. Still the same story. It's a very brief story in the Old Testament. It's not a whole lot that goes on. It basically is Genesis 1 feels like God created the world in 7 days, which was never meant to be read literally, by the way. This is a modern phenomenon in the last 150 years to read any of the Bible literally. Christ taught in parables because of the symbolic meaning. And yet there's a modern trend of reading the Bible literally, which I think is just a trend and won't last for very long. But the 7 days of creation happen, and then it feels like minutes later we got kicked out. That we got to enjoy paradise, or Adam and Eve got to enjoy paradise for feels like minutes before they got kicked out. Because it is such a brief story, but wow, is there so much packed into this metaphorical story. But I'll say from the Vedantic perspective, from James's Vedantic perspective, this is me talking, I've actually never heard someone talk about this from the Vedantic lens, from the non-dualistic lens, but here is my interpretation. This 4, 5, 7 dimension interpretation that I now have that I didn't have before of this story. So why'd they get kicked out? My previous version of me was like, well, they disobeyed God. The Vedantic interpretation of the story is Adam and Eve are there in the garden, in paradise, in harmony. They are unaware of themselves. They are just living in harmony. Non-egoistic harmony with everything around them, with everything, with the universe. And what tempts Eve, what throws them out of harmony, and ultimately, that's symbolically, out of that harmony, which throws them out of the garden. The garden is harmony. That paradise is harmony. It's not bountiful plants. It's not flora and fauna. It's just harmony itself. And what throws them out of harmony, which is a story for all of us, throws us out of harmony, is her personal desire for more. Singular desire. I want a little bit more. Ramana Maharshi had a famous quote that, why do you all keep leaving the shade and going out and getting burned? And you go back to the shade, and then you go out and get burned. You go back to the shade. We can't help it. Can't stop ourselves. So we go out and get burned. Eve and Adam wanted a little bit more. They didn't just want a little bit more. They didn't just eat a fruit that they weren't allowed to eat. They ate from the fruit of knowledge. The fruit of the tree of knowledge. And the knowledge that they got was self-awareness, egoistic self-identification, lowercase s, self-identification. And instead of this harmony, unaware of their egoistic selves, they eat from the fruit and immediately realize they're naked, vulnerable. Before, they had no idea. Before, they weren't. And after, they had this sense of, oh, well, now I have this egoistic identification. Something can happen to me. I could die. That egoistic identification that comes from that tree of the self-awareness, lowercase s, self-awareness and identification. That desire for a little bit more brought them into this realm of vulnerability. There was no God from up above that kicked them out. Their own actions, as is said in this philosophy. And that's why it's a symbolic, metaphorical reading of Genesis, is they were in harmony with the entirety of the universe, including God. And when they took that action in the Vedantic lens, there's no such thing as being punished for the sin. You're punished by the sin. You put your hand in fire. You don't need some cosmic judge to say, well, you made a mistake. You said you weren't going to do that, and then you did it. And now I'm going to punish you on top of you being burned. You're just burned. You're punished by the sin, not for the sin. You lie, and then you can't sleep at night because you lied to your boss about something. You're agitated. You're punished by the sin, not for the sin. That agitation, that egoistic awareness, vulnerability, the egoistic desire to not be vulnerable leads to this cascade of agitations. Putting clothes on, that's symbolic of trying not to be vulnerable. Covering up vulnerabilities, worrying about vulnerabilities. Sad state of the egoistic self is that we got vulnerabilities everywhere. Everywhere, in every direction, literally and metaphorically, that we have to worry about. Getting kicked out of the garden is leaving, through our own choices, leaving harmony in a pursuit, selfish pursuit. I'm going to get a little bit more than everyone else in the garden. Everyone else is living in harmony, and I'm going to get a little bit more. I'm going to have a little bit more insight to be more godlike over everything else. I want this garden to serve me, not for me to serve the garden. Because in the story of the fall, there was work in the garden before the fall. There was work in paradise. But there's this subtle, pervasive desire for the garden to serve you instead of playing our role and serving the garden. And in serving the garden, working the garden, it means that our own work grows that tree, every tree in there. Our own work fosters that harmony. Our action, our service, fosters that harmony. But the biggest mistake we can make, I just did an episode on the Gita. The last episode is on the Bhagavad Gita. And the two big takeaways from the Gita are, I am not the doer, and the fruits of my actions are not mine. Those are the two big lessons. You are not who you think you are. You're not the actor. You're not the doer. And the fruits of your actions are not yours. Hence, fruit. Why is it fruit? Why wouldn't it be just like, don't climb to the top of the mountain where there's awareness? Or don't come to this part of the garden. It's don't eat from the fruit. And that's because the fruits of our actions are not for us. And whenever, this is where this thing took on crazy new dimensionality. The fruit is not something separate from us. That is not in the non-dualistic, the Advaita Vedanta perspective, this philosophical perspective on the story. The fruit is not separate from us. There is no separate tree. This is the amplification of the harmony aspect of this story. There's just harmony, oneness in this paradise. Peace, prosperity, oneness, eternity, infinitude. And what makes us forget, kicks us out of that peace and prosperity to one day return, but what kicks us out, not just doing what we shouldn't do, it's specifically thinking the fruit is ours. That's why it's eating fruit. It's why the symbolism is eating fruit and not going to the top of a mountain or going to a certain restricted place that you shouldn't go in the garden, like, the elephant graveyard in The Lion King. Specifically, eating of the fruit. Thinking, Eve and Adam, thinking this is for us. Anytime we think the result of our work is for us, well, that's when we really feel the agitation of getting kicked out of harmony. We hide. We cover it. We stoop over. We make sure no one's looking. It's the definition of separation. It's separating ourselves from the garden. It's not a physical, geographical location, this garden. This harmony that we ourselves separate from. It's whenever we think the fruits of our actions are for us and we eat of them. Don't eat the fruit. It's not ours. And whenever you do, quite literally or metaphorically, take a bite out of the fruit. Know that that is just nutrition for you to continue to serve. Even that bite that you might enjoy, literally, metaphorically, is not yours. Even that bite is an investment for your family, your community, your region, your state, your country, all humanity, all living beings. It is not, however, yours. At least that's what this philosophy says and maps so perfectly with the story of the garden, where Eden is not something that kicks you out. It's not a place with some cosmic judge that says, hey, you got to go. It's our own decisions that take us out of harmony with our family, our community. Because we separate ourselves whenever we think, ooh, this is for me. And with this, all of this out there, well, it could serve me a little bit better. With this fruit, I'll be able to rule over it. And it'll all be mine. And it turns out, not just in the story, not just in the metaphor, but in our experiences, nothing could be further from the truth. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.